It was Brenda, my mother-in-law, and the silent ding of my security camera confirmed she was once again violating my home, zeroing in on the one place she was absolutely forbidden. The notification popped up on my phone with a quiet, almost apologetic little ding. Living room camera, motion detected. My heart did a familiar lurch, the one that's a cocktail of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated dread. I was in the middle of a quarterly budget presentation, standing in front of 10 stone-faced executives, but my mind was suddenly 100 miles away, in my own apartment. I subtly angled my phone on the lectern, my thumb hovering over the app icon. I knew, with the certainty of a seasoned soldier who knows the sound of incoming artillery, exactly what, or rather who, that motion was. It was Brenda, my mother-in-law. My husband, Mark, and I had been married for 3 years, and, for 3 years, Brenda had been waging a silent, smiling war against every boundary I'd ever tried to set. She had a key to our apartment, a concession I'd fought against but ultimately lost. "For emergencies, Chloe," Mark had pleaded. "What if something happens to us? She needs to be able to get in." The problem was, Brenda's definition of emergency was incredibly broad, ranging from, "I baked a casserole and it needs to be refrigerated immediately," to, "I was in the neighbourhood and thought your ficus looked thirsty." I tapped the app open, my breath catching in my throat. The live feed flickered to life. There she was, standing in the middle of our living room, her purse on our sofa. The camera's wide-angle lens made her look small and slightly distorted, but there was nothing small about her presence. She was running a finger along my bookshelf, her expression a mixture of mild disapproval and intense curiosity. She adjusted a picture frame that was already perfectly straight. She fluffed a throw pillow that I had just fluffed that morning. It was a violation in 1,000 tiny cuts. My knuckles were white as I gripped the sides of the lectern, my voice barely wavering as I continued to drone on about profit margins and Q4 projections. I watched as she finished her passive-aggressive tour of the main living area. She peered into the kitchen, likely judging the single dirty pan I'd left in the sink. Then she turned and started down the hallway. My blood went cold. There are only 3 doors in our hallway: the bathroom, our bedroom, and the third door. The locked door. That third room was my sanctuary. It was my home office, my art studio, the one place in the entire world that was unequivocally mine. It housed my half-finished canvases, my expensive art supplies, and my work computer with sensitive client data. More than that, it held my peace of mind. Mark understood this. After a particularly egregious emergency where Brenda had reorganised my entire pantry, we'd had a serious talk. The compromise was that the third room was off limits, permanently. The door was to remain locked, and she was not to have a key. He swore he'd explained it to her. I watched on my phone as her sensible shoes stopped right in front of the door. The door was painted a deep navy blue, a stark contrast to the white of the hallway. It was a statement, a boundary made visible. She reached out and tried the handle. It didn't budge. She tried it again with more force this time. A faint jiggle was audible through my phone's speaker. A wave of fury, so potent it made me dizzy, washed over me. The executives in front of me became a blur. Brenda pulled out her own phone. A minute later, my phone vibrated with an incoming call from Mark. I muted my presentation mic and declined the call. He would leave a voicemail. He always did when he was running interference for her. I watched, my heart hammering against my ribs, as Brenda stood tapping her foot impatiently. A few moments later, she looked at her phone, read a message, and a triumphant little smile spread across her face. She walked back into the living room, heading for the small decorative bowl where we kept our spare keys. My breath hitched. "No, Mark, you didn't," I whispered to myself, the words a silent prayer, but I knew he had. I knew his spine had dissolved the second his mommy had expressed her frustration. He told her about the spare key we kept hidden in the bowl, the key I had insisted we get rid of. She returned to the navy blue door, the small silver key glinting in her hand. This was it. This was the moment she would finally breach my last line of defense. I felt a surge of helplessness so profound I thought I might be sick. She inserted the key into the lock. She turned it, and nothing happened. A look of complete and utter confusion crossed her face. She tried again, jiggling it, forcing it. It wouldn't turn. A slow, cold smile spread across my own face. Because 3 weeks ago, after a gut feeling I couldn't shake, I had paid a locksmith $200 to come and change the lock on that one specific door. I hadn't even told Mark. Brenda's confusion curdled into frustration, then into a quiet rage. Her face, pinched and red, was inches from the camera's view now. She rattled the doorknob with both hands, a savage, desperate motion. Then she balled her hand into a fist, and she started to pound. The sound was a dull, rhythmic thump, thump, thump that I could hear clearly through the phone, a brutal drumbeat of entitlement. She was pounding on my door, in my home, while I stood miles away, watching her on a screen, a prisoner in my own presentation. The pounding grew louder, more frantic, the thuds echoing the furious beat of my own heart. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the noise. I zoomed the camera in as close as I could. She was just standing there, breathing heavily, her hand still resting on the doorknob. What was she thinking? Was she giving up? Was she calling Mark again to complain? Then I heard a new sound, a faint, metallic scraping. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't the sound of a key, it was a thin, scratching noise, coming from the lock itself. She had pulled a bobby pin from her hair and was trying to pick my lock. A bobby pin. A flimsy black bobby pin against a brand new, high-security deadbolt. It was so absurd I almost laughed. The sound of my own voice, calmly explaining revenue streams, felt like it was coming from someone else. My entire consciousness was compressed into the 4-inch screen on the lectern. I watched her little plan unfold in grainy detail. She knelt, her ear pressed against the navy blue wood, like a safecracker in a cheap movie, her tongue sticking out from the corner of her mouth in concentration. The scraping sound continued, a pathetic, tinny little noise against the solid weight of the lock. "Chloe?" The voice of my boss, Mr. Henderson, cut through the fog. "Could you elaborate on the projected Q4 downturn in the European market?" I snapped my gaze up from the phone. 10 pairs of eyes were on me. For a horrifying second, my brain was completely empty. All I could think of was Brenda, on her knees in my hallway. I took a breath. "Of course, David," I said, my voice miraculously steady. "As you'll see on slide 27, the downturn is largely attributed to new regulatory hurdles, which we've already begun to strategize against. Our mitigation plan is threefold." My mouth was moving, saying the right corporate words, but my eyes were glued back to the phone. The bobby pin snapped. I saw the tiny piece of metal fall to the floor. Brenda let out a frustrated grunt that was perfectly audible. She stood up, slapped the door with the flat of her palm, and then stormed out of the camera's view, back towards the living room. I held my breath. Was she leaving? Had she finally given up? A tiny, fragile seed of hope began to sprout in my chest. Maybe this was it. Maybe she'd finally hit a wall she couldn't push through. My phone buzzed again, a text from Mark, then another, and another. I ignored them. I knew what they'd say. "Mum just called me. She's worried about you. Why aren't you answering?" Followed by, "She says your office door is stuck. Can you call her?" And finally, the inevitable. "Chloe, please, just call her. It's not a big deal." Not a big deal. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone against the wall and watch it shatter. Then I heard it. A clatter from the direction of the kitchen. A drawer being yanked open with enough force to rattle its contents. Then another. A cold dread, far worse than the initial anger, crept up my spine. The bobby pin was improvisation. This was different. This was escalation. What was she looking for? A knife? Was she going to try and jimmy the lock with a butter knife? The thought was so pathetic it was almost comical, but the intent behind it was terrifying. She reappeared, walking with a purpose that made my stomach clench. But she wasn't holding a knife. She was holding something much, much worse. She was holding Mark's big red toolbox. My blood ran cold. The toolbox was supposed to be in the back of the hall closet, buried under winter coats and old blankets. I had put it there myself. She must have hunted for it. She'd gone through my closets, searching for a way to break into my private space. The violation was so profound, so complete that I felt a tremor run through my hands. I gripped the lectern tighter, my knuckles aching. I finished, my voice sounding distant and tinny to my own ears. I clicked to the next slide, my movements stiff and robotic. On the screen of my phone, Brenda set the toolbox down in front of the navy blue door with a heavy thud. She unclipped the metal latches and threw the lid open. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner. I knew what was in there: a hammer, a set of heavy-duty screwdrivers, a small crowbar. These weren't tools for fixing a leaky faucet. In her hands, they were instruments of demolition. She knelt again, rummaging through the contents. I couldn't see exactly what she was looking at, just the top of her perfectly coiffed grey hair, as she sorted through the tools with a grim determination. This wasn't about a stuck door anymore. This was a siege. This was her, with a box full of weapons, laying siege to the one tiny piece of this world that was mine. My phone buzzed again, a call from Mark. I declined it without a second thought. I couldn't talk to him. I couldn't hear his excuses, his justifications, his pathetic attempts to placate the woman who was currently preparing to dismantle our home. Brenda finally found what she was looking for. She stood up, her back still to the camera. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. Should I excuse myself? Run out of the presentation and call the police? What would I even say? My mother-in-law is breaking into a room in my own apartment. They'd think it was a domestic squabble. They wouldn't get there in time. Then she turned. In her hand, she was holding a long, flat-headed screwdriver. The big one. The one Mark used for prying things open. Her face was set in a mask of grim resolve. She wasn't smiling anymore. She planted her feet, raised the screwdriver, and jammed the tip into the tiny gap between the door and the frame, right next to the new deadbolt. I watched, horrified, as she put her shoulder into it, using her entire body weight to try and pry the door open. The sound was excruciating, a splintering, groaning protest of wood and metal that I could hear with perfect clarity through my phone's tiny speaker. It was a visceral, sickening noise that seemed to echo deep in my bones. I flinched as if I'd been struck myself. My beautiful navy blue door, the one I had painstakingly painted and sealed myself, was being gouged and brutalized. I could see the white paint of the doorframe flaking away, tiny chips falling to the floor like snow. She grunted with the effort, her face contorted, sweat beading on her upper lip. My presentation was over. I barely registered the polite applause or the scrape of chairs as the executives began to file out. Mr. Henderson was walking towards me, a pleasant smile on his face, his hand extended. "Excellent work, Chloe. Really compelling data." I shook his hand, my own feeling like a piece of ice. "Thank you, David. I appreciate that." My voice was a hollow shell. My mind was still in my hallway, watching the destruction. My phone was now clutched in my hand under the lectern, my thumb smudging the screen as I stared, mesmerized and horrified. Brenda wasn't making much progress. The new lock was holding firm, the deadbolt deeply set into the frame. But she was determined. She pulled the screwdriver out and examined the tip, then jammed it back in, this time lower down, trying to find a point of weakness. Each thrust was a physical blow. This wasn't just about getting into a room anymore. This was about power. It was a physical manifestation of her refusal to accept any boundary, her absolute belief that she was entitled to every square inch of my life. "Got a minute to go over the quarterly dinner seating chart?" David asked, pulling me from my trance. "Actually," I said, my voice tight, "I have a sudden emergency at home. I am so sorry. I have to go." The look of concern on his face was genuine, but I couldn't process it. Quote shit. Do 10. Quote to 11. I stammered, already shoving my laptop into its bag, my movements frantic and clumsy. I didn't wait for his reply. I practically ran out of the conference room, my heels clattering on the polished floor. As I jabbed the button for the elevator, my eyes were still locked on my phone. The screwdriver method had failed. The doorframe was a mangled mess of splintered wood and scarred paint, but the door itself remained stubbornly shut. She threw the screwdriver back into the toolbox with a clang of frustration. I felt a fleeting, triumphant spark. She was being defeated. But The spark died as soon as it was lit. Brenda was not a woman who accepted defeat. She stood for a moment, breathing heavily, her hands on her hips as she glared at the door. It was as if she was having a personal standoff with the inanimate object. Then, her eyes scanned the hallway and fixed on something outside the camera's view. She walked off screen for a moment. My heart leapt into my throat. What now? What else could she possibly find to use as a weapon? The elevator doors opened, and I rushed inside, my phone still clutched in my hand like a lifeline. I fumbled for my car keys, my mind a chaotic whirl of rage and fear. I had to get home. I had to stop her. Brenda came back into view on my screen. She was carrying one of my dining room chairs. It was a solid oak chair, heavy and sturdy. My stomach dropped. I knew, with a sickening certainty, what she was going to do before she even did it. She positioned the chair a few feet back from the door, gripping the high back with both hands. She was going to use it as a battering ram. "No," I whispered to the empty elevator. "No, Brenda, don't you dare!" She took a deep breath, her whole body tensing. She was a woman in her late 60s, not particularly strong, but she was fueled by a rage so pure and potent, it seemed to give her superhuman strength. She lifted the chair, its legs scraping against the hardwood floor. I saw the muscles in her arms strain with the effort. My phone started ringing. It was Mark. This time, I answered, jamming the phone between my ear and shoulder as I ran through the parking garage. "What?" I snapped, my voice sharp with panic. "Chloe, what is going on? Mom is hysterical," he said, his voice a mixture of confusion and accusation. "She said she got locked in the hallway and your office door is jammed and she's worried something happened and... She's lying, Mark," I screamed, the sound echoing in the concrete garage. "She is in our apartment right now, trying to break down my office door with a dining room chair." There was a moment of stunned silence on his end. "What? A chair? Chloe, that's insane. She would never..." His words were cut off by the sound that came through my phone's speaker. A deafening, splintering crash. On the screen, I saw the chair swing forward and connect with the centre of the navy blue door. A spiderweb of cracks appeared in the wood around the point of impact. The whole door shuddered in its frame. Brenda stumbled back, resetting her grip, preparing for another swing. The first real, tangible damage had been done. My sanctuary had been breached, and she was just getting started. I yelled into the phone, my voice cracking. I finally reached my car and fumbled with the fob, the doors unlocking with a chirp that sounded ridiculously cheerful. He started, his voice a placating, infuriating drone. Quote, cheers. Quote, 24. I shrieked, starting the car with a raw, quote, base. Another crash echoed, both from my phone's speaker and faintly down the line from Mark's end. He was on the phone with her, or had been. He could hear it too. The silence that followed was damning. He whispered. I spat, pulling out of my parking spot so fast the tires squealed in protest. Time. I hung up on him. I couldn't listen to another second of his weak-willed excuses. My focus was split between the road ahead and the tiny, horrifying movie playing out on the phone propped against my dashboard. Crash. A large chunk of wood splintered off the door near the handle. I could now see a sliver of darkness through the hole. Brenda was panting, her grey hair falling out of its usually perfect arrangement, but her eyes had a wild, manic gleam. She was possessed by this. The room, the locked door, had become a symbol of my defiance, and she was hell-bent on smashing it to pieces. Crash. The hole grew bigger. She was aiming for the same spot now, a brutal, focused assault. With every impact, a piece of my composure crumbled. This wasn't just wood and paint she was destroying. It was 3 years of swallowed frustrations, of polite smiles through gritted teeth, of backing down to keep the peace. Every splinter was a boundary she had crossed, every crack a concession I had made. I was driving like a maniac, weaving through traffic, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. My apartment was a 20-minute drive on a good day. It felt like a lifetime. I watched as she paused, resting the chair on the floor to catch her breath. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smear of dirt. For a moment, she just stared at the damage she'd wrought. I hoped, prayed for a flicker of shame, of realization, but there was none. Her expression hardened again, and she hefted the chair for another go. That's when I remembered. It was a thought that shot through my panic with the clarity of an ice pick. The camera. The camera she was standing right in front of. It didn't just stream live video. It had a two-way audio feature, a feature I had never once used. My finger trembled as I navigated the app's interface, the car swerving slightly as I took my eyes off the road for a second. I found the little microphone icon. Brenda had the chair raised again, her back to the camera, preparing for what looked like a final, mighty swing. I pressed the button. My voice, amplified and distorted by the small speaker, boomed into the hallway. It was loud, much louder than I expected, filled with a raw, guttural fury I didn't know I possessed. On the screen, Brenda froze mid-swing. The chair wavered in her hands. She slowly, cautiously, lowered it to the floor. She turned, her eyes wide and searching, her face a mask of shocked confusion. She scanned the empty living room, the kitchen, the ceiling. "Mark," she called out, her voice shaky. "Is that you? Did you get home?" I pressed the button again, my voice low and cold. "It's not Mark, Brenda. It's Chloe." The colour drained from her face. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her eyes darted around until they finally landed on the camera, a small black dome mounted discreetly on the corner of the bookshelf. I watched her pupils dilate as she realised what it was. She knew. She knew I was watching her. I said, my voice dangerously calm now. "Quote, Jet C5. She was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The righteous fury on her face had been replaced by a dawning, panicked horror. The predator had suddenly realised it was the one being watched. I lied, the words tasting like victory. That did it. Pure animal panic flashed in her eyes. She looked from the camera to the mangled door, to the heavy chair in her hands. She was trapped. She dropped the chair with a clatter, as if it had burned her. She started backing away, her hands held up in a placating gesture towards the camera, towards me. "Quote, 38, she stammered, her voice a pathetic, wheedling whine. I said, my voice like ice. I was only 5 minutes away now, the familiar landmarks of my neighbourhood flashing past my windows. "Quote, Goyes." She bolted. She didn't even grab her purse from the couch. She just turned and ran for the front door, fumbling with the lock in her haste. A second later, the door slammed shut, leaving behind a scene of utter chaos. A splintered toolbox, a heavy oak chair lying on its side, and a navy blue door that looked like it had been attacked with an axe. The silence she left behind was deafening. I had won. I had driven her out. I pulled into my apartment complex, my heart still pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a triumphant, savage smile on my face. I killed the engine, grabbed my phone, and ran for the stairs, ready to survey the damage and finally change the locks on the front door. But as I rounded the corner to my floor, I skidded to a halt. My front door, the one Brenda had just fled through, was wide open, and standing in the doorway, blocking my path, wasn't a police officer. It was Mark. And the look on his face was not one of relief, or of concern for me. It was a look of cold, quiet fury, and it was directed entirely at me. For a long moment, we just stood there in the silent hallway, the wreckage of the afternoon laid out behind him. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. His eyes, usually so warm and gentle, were chips of ice. He had his arms crossed over his chest, a defensive posture that was clearly meant to be intimidating. I could see Brenda's purse still sitting on the couch over his shoulder. She hadn't gone far. She was probably cowering in his car downstairs, feeding him a tearful, twisted version of events. "What did you do, Chloe?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. It wasn't a question. It was an indictment. I felt a surge of disbelief so strong it almost knocked me backward. I asked, my own voice rising with incredulity. I gestured wildly at the scene behind him. He shot back, taking a step forward. The excuse was so laughably thin, so utterly pathetic, that I did laugh. It was a harsh, bitter sound that echoed in the hallway. He demanded, his face reddening. I said, the word coming out cold and sharp. He said, shaking his head in disgust. Quote, Chapter 53. Quote, For just us, I screamed, finally losing the last thread of my control. Quote. He flinched, the truth of my words finally hitting him with the force of a physical blow. His defensive posture faltered. He looked past me, down the hall, then back at the mangled door, really seeing it for the first time. The deep gouges in the wood, the splintered frame, the gaping hole near the knob. The physical evidence was undeniable. This wasn't the work of a worried woman. This was the work of a vandal. She said it was just a little stuck, he mumbled, the excuse sounding weak even to his own ears. This, I said, stepping past him and into our apartment, is not a little stuck. I walked down the hall and stood before my violated door. I ran a hand over the rough, splintered wood, a profound sadness washing over me. This is a choice. She chose to do this. And you, Mark, you have a choice to make too. He followed me slowly, his footsteps hesitant on the hardwood floor. He stopped beside me, his gaze fixed on the destruction. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. I could hear the frantic ticking of the clock in the kitchen, counting down the seconds of our life together. I didn't push. I didn't say another word. I just waited. The next move had to be his. Finally, he let out a long, shuddering breath. My whole life, he began, his voice barely a whisper. She's been like this, a force of nature. It was always just easier to give in, to smooth things over, to manage her. I never learned how to say no to her. He looked at me, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I saw not anger, but a deep, gut-wrenching shame in his eyes. I am so sorry. Chloe, I should have protected you. That door, it shouldn't have been you against her. It should have been us. I failed you. I failed us. Tears pricked my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of a painful, complicated relief. It was the first time he had ever truly acknowledged the reality of his mother, not the idealized version he kept in his head. What? 63 so I asked, my voice soft. He walked past me and picked up Brenda's purse from the couch. Then he grabbed her coat, which was draped over a chair. He walked to the front door and placed them gently in the hallway, just outside our apartment. Then he came back in, closed the door firmly, and slid the deadbolt into place. The sound was loud and final. He pulled out his phone. I watched as he found his mother's contact. His thumb hovered over the call button for a long, agonizing second. Then he navigated to a different screen. He took a screenshot, then another. He was taking pictures of the messages I had seen earlier, the ones from Brenda complaining, the ones from him trying to placate her. He finally pressed the call button. He put it on speaker. Brenda answered at the first ring, her voice a theatrical sobbing mess. Mark, honey, is everything okay? That woman is a monster. I was so frightened. Mom, Mark cut in, his voice firm and unwavering in a way I had never heard before. Listen to me very carefully. You will take a taxi home. Your things are in the hallway. The key you have to this apartment no longer works because the locks are being changed first thing in the morning. What? Mark? What are you saying? I was just trying to... I know what you were trying to do, Mum. I also know what you did do. You lied to me, and you tried to break down a door in my home. You caused thousands of dollars in damage, and you terrified my wife. He paused, taking a deep breath. We are done. You and I, we are taking a long, long break. I will call you when I am ready to talk about setting some real, permanent boundaries. Until then, do not come here. Do not call me. Do not call Chloe. We are done. He ended the call before she could respond, the silence in the apartment roaring back to life. He then turned to me, his face etched with pain, but also with a new, unfamiliar resolve. The first call tomorrow is to a locksmith. The second is to a carpenter to get a new door. The third, he said, his eyes meeting mine, is to a marriage counsellor, because I have a lot of work to do if I want to deserve to be in this home with you. I looked at him, at the man I had married who was finally choosing me. I looked at the wrecked door, a monument to a battle that had been years in the making. It was ugly and broken, but for the first time, it felt like it was truly ours. We had a long road ahead, but the war was over, and we had won.